Hey, friends, welcome back to Genuine Life Recovery. And today we're talking sugar addiction. I'm Jody Stevens, excited to be joined by Mike Collins. Mike has spent nearly 40 years diving into the impact of sugar addiction and recovery and has been completely sugar free for over 30 years, which is amazing to me. I've got to talk to you about that. He's the past chairman for the board of Food Addiction Institute. They help raise awareness about processed foods. Oh my goodness. There's a buzzword right now. I mean, you're in the right place at the right time for sure now. And he's also the founder of sugaraddiction.com and wrote the book, The Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide. Hi, Mike. Did I cover everything?
You got it. Well, we do these summits every year. Quit Sugar Summits. Really amazing. They'd love that.
Nice. Well, okay, so before we kind of get into the sugar addiction, first of all, where are you in the country? Where do you live?
Santa Monica, California.
Santa Monica Boulevard. Nice. Okay, so are you getting like smoke there or anything?
I was 3 blocks from being evacuated. I could see the fire the first night
Gosh.
from my balcony, and it was kind of scary, but I never did get evacuated. So that I guess I got lucky there. But it was the place that I used to live in. Pacific Palisades is the one you see on the news where the entire
Yeah.
neighborhoods are leveled, and that little town. I can't believe it was such a beautiful place.
That must be heartbreaking just being there
It's
and
hard. I
I'm
haven't been
so
up there yet, but I don't think you can go up there yet. I think the
yeah.
National Guard's still up there, but
Wow. Yeah, so at the time of this recording, that's, these big fires are taking down LA and all over. And yeah, I was doing a radio fundraiser with a guy the other day, and he was piped in from LA, and we're talking, and all of a sudden he's like, I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, another fire broke out, and he can see the smoke. And
yep.
oh my goodness. Praying for you all over there. It's just been crazy. Well, thanks for making time for joining us. Before we get into the sugar, can you give us your story? Because I know when you and I talked, you had mentioned that prior to realizing sugar as really being a drug, which we can talk about, you had struggles with other addictions, and then you got sober, I think, and that's sort of what led you into this realization about sugar. So can you take us back a little bit if you don't mind?
Yeah, Steve Jobs famously said you can really only connect the dots from in hindsight, after you've kind of already done it. But
Yeah.
I think, one of the most important messages is that I didn't realize when I was young, and most people don't now in the world, and I think this is part of our problem, both people in recovery and not people people not in recovery, is that sugar is the original gateway drug. And my mother was my favorite sugar junkie. And she grew up believing sugar was love. And so I grew up that way. And we were just
Yeah.
covered up with sugar. The most important message that I have to deliver is that I didn't realize sugar was changing my state. I grew up in an alcoholic, verbally and physically abusive home. And my mother used sugar to escape that, and thus we use sugar to escape that.
Oh,
And so it was, as much sugar as we
yep.
can put on our cornflakes and scrape up half an inch with the milk, and 3 times the recipe for Kool-Aid. And that doesn't even include all the treats and candies and cookies and cakes and everything. And so fast forward, I run into beer at 14 years old or 13 years old, whatever. And I knew that beer changed my state. I knew that I was a little shy. I could drink behind the high school and I could talk to the girls. So we used to call it liquid courage. I think they still do.
Yes, they do.
And so again, fast forward, and I can talk as much about my drunkalog as you want, but I got sober
Right.
at 28 and I went right back to sugar, as do most people. And just as an example, we've done 41 plus thousand sugar detoxes, and probably a couple of thousand of those people are people in recovery.
Yeah.
And they did the same thing. They got sober and they went back to sugar as their, that self-soothing, that numbing. The emotional eating folks get a part of the equation, right? Yes, it is an emotional salve, an emotional analgesic, but the
Yeah.
bottom line is a lot of addicts end up addicted to sugar. They gain a lot of weight. They get type 2 diabetes diagnosis. And so I did the same thing. I don't think I ate any food. It was pizza and pasta and 16-ounce Mountain Dews way before energy drinks came out,
Oh,
which was the highest caffeinated
oh,
and
oh,
sugar drink on the market. So here I
yeah,
am, pounding the caffeine, pounding the sugar, 6 or 8 a day, right? And it was
yeah.
just, and that lasted, I wanted to get healthy when I got sober. And so I really just was digging into. I read a book called Sugar Blues by a guy named William Duffy. And
Uh-huh.
Duffy eventually married Gloria Swanson, the famous movie star. And they promoted the book pretty heavily. So I got lucky and discovered it and started working on it. And it took me a long time because in recovery, they used to call me the weird addiction specialist. You know, the old timers would say, "Are you sober today?" And I say, "Yeah." Well, so don't worry about the sugar.
Right,
And
right,
so,
yeah.
you
Yeah,
know, they would,
well, and I'll just interject and say,
yeah,
initially, if someone is trying to not like die of opiates or something, fine, they'd hand you a Snickers. But,
yeah,
at some point, you're right, you get to a point of sobriety. And then, I mean, same thing happened to me. It's like I get sober, you balloon out. And at that point, when you're stable, yeah, you got to work on the underlying issues, which
right.
I'm sure you had to, look at that stuff too. But anyway, I digress. Yes,
Well,
but
I mean, it's the
that is
same,
the theory is just,
right? No, anyone's
smoke
ever,
cigarettes and eat and drink coffee and eat sugar and you're good, right? In
yeah.
recovery.
Well, it's even in the big book a couple of times,
Yeah, yeah.
that sugar is a good substitute or
Uh,
whatever. You should, but if anyone has ever been to a 12-step food program, they know they start to work on the same issues. It's really
yeah.
genuinely the same addiction. The problem is that, and I even hate using this word real in front of the word addiction when it comes to sugar and ultra processed carbohydrates, because I mentioned the Quit Sugar Summits that we've done for the last 8 years. Science is very clear now that sugar can affect your emotional and your brain. It's
Oh,
like, I
yeah.
mean, they're calling Alzheimer's diabetes 3, advancing and rapidly growing psychiatry field of metabolic psychiatry, where, as people get off of ultra processed carbs, they heal up from depression and bipolar and even epilepsy. There's just a lot of science on this now. And the problem is most people in society don't recognize it. They don't recognize it that the science has advanced so far. It's just not out there in the public knowledge. It's very similar to what happened with cigarettes. When the science started to say this is killing people, it's the same thing here, except the addiction component is very difficult for people to grasp because you can give this to a baby. Nobody's going to be mad at you. Like it's not illegal. And so it's just so normalized in society now that it's going to take some time for the science
Yeah.
to catch up, or the public, excuse me, to catch up with the science.
What's sad too about the whole tobacco thing is tobacco is the number one killer worldwide. While they did, in other words, the health warnings are on it and everybody now at least knows what it is. And
Right.
obviously we're seeing that shift in our society now where I keep saying to my husband, the gig is up. Like I have this Yucca app. I don't know if you have it, and you can scan everything and it tells you everything that's in it.
Mm.
And I just realized, and they do, so we went through the food stuff, right? And then they do skincare. So last night, I'm in the bathroom throwing away all my nail polish, throwing away, like nothing was good. Everything had all these harsh chemicals.
Right.
And, we had started trying to get rid of the preservatives a little while back, but still some of the things that I thought were so great, no, they're not, so it is, like you said, it's going to take some time, but we're starting to figure it out because they say 70% of our food here is ultra processed.
All
That's
right.
crazy.
It is
That's
crazy.
crazy, Mike.
I know. I know. I know. It's true. You got to shop the outside of the grocery store. You can't shop the boxes and bags and cans, and
Yeah.
it's sad because I have a book over here, hook. They literally have MRIs at these campuses of food companies. They'll slide people into an MRI and they'll put the new substance on their tongue because they can't really move. It's weird how they do it. But you'll see their brain light up just like
Yep.
heroin. And they want this. They want to be able to keep people coming back. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't realize that you like that specific spaghetti sauce because it's so loaded up with sugar. You just think you like the taste, and they do those experiments, but the experiments work because of the ultra processed carbohydrates in it, the sugar mostly.
Oh my God. Well, and it's so funny because we love chips and salsa. So we have all these organic chips, and then we've got this salsa, the Sieta kind. But then my husband got this one that's uh tomatoes, what is it called? Well, at any rate, I said to my husband, I just kept eating it. I said, this is the best salsa I've ever tasted. I can't believe how good. And he goes, well, that's because it's loaded with calories. And I went, what? That's salsa. So I look at the salsa and it's got 80 calories per 2 tablespoons versus regular salsa. And I'm like, well, no wonder I couldn't quit eating it. It's just so funny. I mean, it's still on the good list, but I mean, it just hilarious the way. I mean, obviously you love it because it's loaded with calories, but
Right.
I like what you said about the really the dopamine system in our brain and things like that, because for me personally, as a Christian or in a one who believes in God, I know that He created us with this reward pathway. The reward pathway in the brain is what keeps us alive, right? If we didn't get something from food, recreation, water, we just wouldn't do it, right? And so that's what's so hard, I think, and you could speak to this about food addiction, because if and this is where we could look at sugar as really a drug, right? The dopamine system isn't going to go crazy over chicken breast the way it is over a Snickers bar, right?
Yeah.
I would assume that this is true. But so the thing of it is, just for the folks listening, when you take opiates, when you take drugs, when you drink alcohol, that reward pathway lights up. The reward pathway is designed to keep you alive. And this is why addicts do things that you don't understand, because they really feel like, if I don't shoot up the heroin or whatever, I will die. That's what
That's the
their brain
feeling.
is telling us.
It's the
That's what they're,
feeling.
and so this is kind of, I think, similar with what can happen with sugar, wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah, it's identical.
And so it's right. So it is, but we have to eat to live, right?
Right.
And so maybe kind of talk about
Well,
how
it's
that works
like
a
a
little bit.
construct in recovery called eternal vigilance. And you have to do exactly what you're describing. You have to separate what we call drug foods, which is anything that's been reduced to a white powder, flour, sugar, caffeine, these things. You have to separate them from food, right? The outside of
Yeah.
the grocery store. Because look, here's one of the most important constructs that we teach is that when you're thinking you need to have a craving for a sugar, and it runs along the pathways that you described, you don't really want a sweet taste on your tongue. What you want is a dopamine hit.
Yes.
And when I
Yes.
say dopamine, I mean dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin,
Right.
adrenal glands, endorphins, even cannabinoid receptors in your body.
Yeah.
Every brain and body reward chemical is affected by sugar. And I just use dopamine because people know what it is.
Right.
We use
Yeah.
that as code for all those others as we move forward. And it's
Neurotransmitters, folks. And we have a
exactly,
lot of them.
you're
You know,
grooving a new you're grooving neural pathways in your brain to remember where the food is as we evolved, and where this, how to do sex again so the species survive. And these are neural pathways that get solidified as you continue to use whatever the drug is. And sugar is just as powerful. The difference is important, is that, we take a little heroin, we take a little alcohol, whatever, but we are pounding 20 teaspoons average of sugar a day. I mean, one 12-ounce Coca-Cola has 12 teaspoons of sugar in it. So you're looking at the average is 20. My clients, they start at like 30 and go to as high as 50 or 60 teaspoons of sugar a day, right? And this is just a few sodas a day, a few candies a day or whatever. It's not that much. And it's just a constant 24/7 drip. And it's just disrupting our brain chemicals. It literally shrinks your brain. It puts holes in your brain. The same MRIs that the food companies are weaponizing against us are used to see what's going on in your brain. And they see very clearly that if you are on a standard American diet, eating a lot of processed carbohydrates and sugar, you start to have less brain volume and you get holes in your brain. And the more important part, as I want to emphasize, is this emotional self-soothing. This is really where, this is a brain illness. This is a dopamine dysregulation problem. The scientific term is you have downregulated your dopamine system receptors. You have less of them. They're thinned out. And so if you don't realize that, the person who you think is way overweight and, they should just eat less and exercise more is just as much an addict as the heroin addict. And so, and people they're hesitant to think that. They believe in the ridiculous and very already debunked construct of the diet industry, which says if you eat less and exercise more, then you'll lose the weight. But we have so many bariatric patients and now, GLP-1, Ozempic type patients who have hacked the system, meaning they get their half or more of their stomach cut out, but they still can't give up their sugar addiction, right?
Yeah.
So they don't lose, they lose a little weight, then they gain it all back. And the same thing happens with the other. They think they can eat as much sugar as they want and then still just get the injections, but it doesn't work that way. The body doesn't work that way. So again, this is a intersection of science now and common sense a little bit, but moreover the science of the body. I always say the body guys versus the brain and emotions folks, right? And we've studied the body for 100 years. We know it causes obesity. We know it causes type 2 diabetes and heart disease and about 100 other maladies. But what is less understood is what you and I are talking about, which is that this is an addictive process that is just as powerful emotionally for folks as drugs or alcohol.
The weirdest thing just popped into my mind was this Purdue Pharma, because if anybody's seen Dope Sick, they just got fined $7 billion.
Wow.
Billion with a B, because of all the people that are still dying, and it's just continuing to get worse, this opiate crisis. And it's kind of the same thing like with this sugar, and I'm a very conservative person. Like, I'm not here trying to be all liberal or weird or anything. I'm just like, the gig is up, people. Like, this isn't a right or left thing politically. This is like, we're all just seeing this now, and it's like mass poisoning. When you see all this stuff, I'm like they're poisoning on us. They're poisoning us. Yep. And they're getting rich off it. So what's the difference, Anyway, that's just my little tangent, but
no, it's true. It's absolutely true.
It is very okay to, you go to the church potluck, right? That's the example we always use.
Or an AA meeting.
Right? And everyone's bringing all the sugar and it's interesting going back to the church angle, because if you are obese and addicted to sugar, that's okay. You can be in ministry and serve, but if you're an alcoholic, it's not okay. I just think that's interesting. We tend to say, oh, it's all genetic, and I'm sure there is some truth to that for some individuals, but I think for the most part, right, we're talking about something that is very much, like you said, something that we just think is okay. And I would imagine that complicates recovery when it comes to sugar.
Oh, absolutely. It's familial. It's not, I'm not a big fan of the genetics theory. It's like,
yeah,
it comes up in your family. And moreover, this is an important topic, I think. I think the steps would take people through it organically. But, what's really the science now is proving that, the more trauma you had in your early days, chaos and whatever, both in alcohol and drugs and sugar, that's what the people in my program don't really get when they first come. 85% of them come to me for weight loss originally, or that they got a type 2 diabetes and they're scared. but really it's about
Underlying.
the underlying, what were you self-soothing, right? What were
Yeah.
you like trying to block out, trying to numb? And what are your, how do you use sugar as an everyday analgesic, or to numb out from the stresses and strains of life, your husband, your
Mm.
job, your kids, and all that kind of stuff? So if people could put these two together, the emotional eating systems or books and authors, they got half of the equation right, but they do not have the addiction piece of the puzzle. Or do the people in treatment centers have it right? They
Yeah.
believe, both groups believe, that if you can't eat a little bit of flour and sugar in moderation, then you're not well. You haven't graduated from treatment or whatever. But at the end of the day, there is a percentage, and you mentioned I was the chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute. What I learned there in that stay was that about a third of people biochemically cannot ingest sugar without setting up cravings for more sugar.
Yeah.
And then about a third of people are harmful users, meaning they got dragged into this ridiculous food system unknowingly, and they can get a little reset. But for the main third of people, the people that end up at my doorstep, those folks, they're just addicts. And addicts
Yeah.
is a hard thing to take for a lot of people, right? They can't, people ask me, Mike, do I have to do this for the rest of my life? And I'm like, maybe.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my only job in life is to get them to see 90 days of abstinence, and
Yeah.
what it takes to, well, how hard it is, first of all, or how, what is required. And it's not all about the food. Matter of fact, it's very little about the food or what they eat. It's
Yeah.
really about this emotional wellness that they return to and what they have been covering up. I love the phrase, the issues are in the tissues, It's trapped. Like the
Yeah.
trauma and the stuff is trapped in your tissues. And when you stop, about day 15, people are like, Mike, I'm losing my mind. They don't realize that they've never not had this crutch since they were probably the womb, but definitely since they were 4 or 5 years old. They've never not had this ability to self-soothe with sugar.
Yeah.
And even a child can get sugar. It's not like it requires a lot of money or anything. It's not, you don't have to steal cars or anything to get it. You just
Right.
walk into the grocery store or the convenience store and get a soda. And it just,
Mm.
that 20 minutes of numbing out from the rest of the world. And then sadly, like any other drug, 20 minutes later, you got to do it again and again.
Right. Yeah. Well, and most addicts have a history of trauma. When we
Exactly.
look at, and yeah, and this show really tackles the underlying issues. And so,
Good.
I'm glad that you brought that up because, for addiction and alcoholism, it's like you said, it's not the alcohol, it's the codependency. It's the codependent, it's the, if you look at
100%.
the Right. If you look at the family dynamics of addiction and the roles, and I'm sure you've studied all that, my brother died of addiction, and, and I look at all the different, and that was just 20 years of hell, but I look at the roles everyone took on and all those types of things. We're all just, dealing with stuffing the trauma, and you could relate it back to the times of war, the times of and if you look at other countries when people are just trying to survive, denial is, it can save your life, right? And this in a
Yeah.
dysfunctional family, right? You got to just shut down because of what dad is doing because he's a drunk or whatever. Pardon me for being so blunt. But
Yep.
then, and this, Mike, you get out into the real world and it doesn't work anymore. Those
These
dysfunctional relating
behaviors.
patterns.
Yeah.
And you're
Yeah.
trying to cope with that. And now you're numbing, right? And so, like you said, you never really are, I'm a big fan of like just the whole mindfulness thing. You never really stop and just,
Right.
it's always just, go, 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 and then eat, and then, that kind of a thing. I mean, what was that like for you when you finally understood, wow, I grew up, there was a lot of trauma. This is relating, this is, the root of my addiction. And how were you able to kind of
Yeah,
work
no, I
through
mean,
that?
you're 100% right. Look, I, was blessed in my early recovery to stumble into a really mature Codependence Anonymous meeting. And in my
Nice.
work, like it's so funny, like people think that some kind of diet plan or, because every diet book says quit the sugar and quit the white stuff. And most of my clients, and 95% of them are women, they they've been dieting their whole life, right? And then I have to get them, they want to talk about the food. They want to talk about the food. They want to, can I eat this? Can I eat that? I'm like,
Right.
and I did a 30-day challenge in videos because I couldn't answer the questions anymore because they were repeated over and over again. But what I did at the end of it, and this is literally the program, my program is a codependency recovery program. It is
Yeah.
a sticking up for yourself program, a saying no program. It's a setting boundaries program. It's a, stop people pleasing program. It's like these are the things that has gotten you in trouble with sugar. And when I lay that on people, if their frontal cortex is still hijacked by sugar, the message doesn't sink in.
Right.
Like I can't get it through because their deep limbic brain has somehow converted the message that they need a dopamine hit into a thought like, I should go out in a snowstorm and get ice cream. Or I should. Like, it would make sense to pull the stuff out of the garbage that I threw in the garbage an hour ago.
It's detox, and you're so right because sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
it's like in recovery. It's like, oh, why don't you just quit drinking? Well, okay, you've got to detox the patient
Yeah.
before anything gets through, So yeah,
The
continue.
reason I know this is because attorneys, multimillionaires, Olympic athletes, people that have come through my program tell me 6 months later, like, Mike, I can't believe I was eating out of the garbage 6 months ago. Like they're prominent, successful people. They've done a lot of great things in their life, but this one little white powder has brought them to their knees physically, emotionally, mentally. They just don't understand it. 20% of the people that call me, Jody, are crying. They've never told the story to anyone. Like they've hidden it forever. The shame that they have of hiding the sugar and sneaking the sugar, right? And it's really difficult for people because it appears that everybody seems to be able to do this in society. But when you see behind this curtain, there's a lot of pain out there brought on by what's a seemingly innocuous sweet treat. It's just not the case, you know what I mean? It really
Yeah.
is a very powerful neurotoxin that is affecting people's brain, hijacking their decision making. I've been getting kind of hard on this because I don't need any clients. I have way too much business for me to, I'm trying to figure out how to get some business guys in here and grow the thing, help more people, because the people are like, they're just not really understanding or accepting of the idea, the scientific idea now that this is possible, even that they could be addicted to sugar, even if they've in recovery. Okay. This is even people in recovery. I mean, people 5, 10, 15 years sober, they can't grasp it. And it takes a little bit of cajoling and easing them and meeting them where they are kind of thing.
Yeah. When I was doing my MS and addiction counseling, I had to do a video, make a slideshow or a video presentation, and I did it in the neurotransmitters and what they do.
Cool.
And I don't know if you've tried something like that, but it was so fascinating to do the pharmacology, to look at the drugs, to actually see the neurotransmitters, something like that, like a visual might help them because you see that and you're like, oh my God,
Right.
like that's what's happening in my brain. Something about the visual of it all, the colors and, so
No, I like
if you have
that.
people that are visual, they might just be like, whoa.
Right.
Because sometimes you just have to see the science behind it, and you're
Well, the
like,
brain scans are really cool where they got the holes in them. Like, this is a normal brain. This is your brain on sugar. Like those old television commercials that they used to have that fried egg.
oh yeah, I know, and those didn't do work at all.
Right, right.
But because they were just so, I don't know. That's a whole nother issue. But
Yeah, yeah.
I want to dive into a little bit of this concept of serenity. You
Yeah.
had mentioned it. So, the Serenity Prayer, which I like to read, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change. So for Mike, that would be his past, right? growing up with an alcoholic father, the courage to change the things I can. So for Mike, look, he changed his life. He did a 180, right? The wisdom to know the difference. This is the hard part. What's mine and what's God's, right? Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you in the next. Amen. So that's the whole Serenity Prayer. Most of us only do the first part, which is
Right.
fine as well. I like the whole thing, it's very beautiful. But talk to me just kind of about how just this concept of serenity was instrumental in your life in addiction and how you've seen it work with clients.
Yeah, no, so, for many years, I didn't even know there was a second part of the Serenity Prayer. And,
Right, right. I know. It's
and I would
beautiful.
repeat the first part over and over and over again. I'm actually doing it in my life on some different things right now. I've resurrected my Serenity Prayer. So, the
Yeah, yeah.
early days, it was God grant me the serenity to accept these things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, the wisdom to know that. I would just over and over and over. And I
And
would,
most of us don't even know what it means. You don't go to an AA meeting. They don't tell you what it means. They just tell you to pray it.
just
You
to
know,
say,
it's crazy. With this podcast on YouTube, I just a long time ago did a step-by-step serenity prayer. Here's how you walk it out. Here's what it means. I mean, it's still the most watched video because it's just explaining
yeah,
that concept. Like, what does it mean and how do we walk it out? And
yeah.
that's really what this series is how do you do that? How is it
Yeah.
practical, right?
Look, here's the science behind it, okay? And so when we do it is when we're stressed or say let's whatever our drug is, let's just say it's sugar, but we've given up the sugar and we're craving, right? And Tony Robbins and neurolinguistic programming call it a pattern interrupt. So we're interrupting a pattern. We're interrupting a pattern of our negative thinking and craving and whatever. And we're saying to ourselves, God, grant me the serenity to accept things like, we interrupt the thought that we're having. And the thought is unconscious from the deep limbic brain to the frontal cortex that we want sugar or alcohol, whatever it is. And we interrupt that pattern and we interrupt it with something positive and something that, gives us instructions that we can get through this next half hour or whatever hour.
Yeah.
And that's the science of it. But, we look at the spirituality of it. You're surrendering as opposed to fighting. You're like, you're like you're giving your life over to a power greater than yourself, and either way works. Whichever way you're inclined, it would work, right?
Yeah.
Because you're interrupting the pattern of self-soothing that you had done forever. And prayer or meditation or whatever your practice is, yoga, can substitute for this self-soothing. And you have to create new practices, whatever it is. You have to create prayer practices, meditation practice, yoga practices, walking practice, running practice, massage. There's a million different ways to self-soothe, but you have to bring conscious, you have to take from the unconscious this pattern that you got in to self-soothe yourself, whether it's old trauma or new stuff, and change it. And if you listen to the first three stanzas of the Serenity Prayer, it does just that. It makes it aware, grant me the serenity to accept, and then it makes you shift, and then it makes you make the change. So it's a real, I think maybe accidentally or divine providence, it was given this, and that's probably why they only used the first three stanzas, likely, or the first three paragraphs. It's super interesting.
Yeah, it's the thing. I think the most powerful part of what it means is so forgiveness, resentment, acceptance. Those are three key things in my life, not necessarily in that order.
Right.
But you look at like let's look at your childhood, for instance, and there was probably some anger as you realized what had happened. And so to me, I always say that, and I probably say this like every other show, because this is what I felt like God told me. I was literally in the shower and I felt the words say, I didn't hear it, but it was, you spend so much time trying to control what you can't you miss the opportunity to control what you can. And what that meant to me, because I'm not an outwardly controlling person at all, but I
Right.
obsess, right?
Yeah.
And that's right. Like I'm so angry at that person, or I have this resentment, and I can't control that other. So a lot of times we're trying to control by just having a resentment. Like if I'm mad at Mike, right, and I don't forgive you, now I'm just instead it's just like I can't change Mike, right? I can change me, right? I can just accept that maybe Mike hates me, maybe he doesn't. Lord, I give that to you, okay? And I stop obsessing, and then I ask you to say, well, what can I do? And this is what I use in the video. Well, you could ask Mike, you could ask Bob, but a lot of times, right, we use this addiction because we're afraid. There's so much fear. Like, I don't want to ask for a raise. I don't want to do that. I don't want. So to take the control back, right? It's like, I'll drink, I'll use, I'll do all this stuff so I just don't have to deal, right? And then it's, I mean, did you find that to be something impactful for you, is figuring out sort of, okay, what's my part? What's God's or your higher power for you, it may be, but
Yeah.
what's my part? And then what can I actually do something about instead of replaying this negativity? Did that make sense?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's like rumination is the root of depression. If you don't
Oh,
break the pattern and stop doing that, it's like the codependency recovery. It's a lot of growing up, taking responsibility, accepting. There's a
yeah.
new book out by a woman, Mel Robbins, I think. Let them. It's
Oh,
just
yeah.
it could just be acceptance. I mean, it doesn't need to be let. It's like if you're just people are going to do what they're going to do, and you have
Right.
to accept it. You have to be able. You'll change it if you need to or have to, but you're not going to change them. That's a lesson that a lot of people don't. They learn way too late in life.
I know, right?
You're not changing anyone else. And a lot of people believe that they can change others. And the common Al-Anon thing is like, you've just got to let it go. You've got to let what they
Yeah.
do go. You've done what you're not pouring the booze out is not going to change them. And being
Mm.
angry is not going to change them. If you can live with it, then you stay and you get healthy. If you can't,
Right.
then you leave. So, those are the first things in the prayer itself. So you've got to be able to do it that way. I mean, that's just really the basis of mental health, right?
Yeah. 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 No, it's so true. You have to come to a place of. I mean, obviously, when there's deep trauma, yes, you've got to work through it.
Yes.
And not everybody, not everybody. There are people that right that you've met that they just want some coping strategies, and that's fine. And this is great for men too. It's like, okay, look, just because you're going to get sober, you don't have to come and cry for a year. You can. Like, that's me. I wanted to know every underlying. I wanted all that. You don't have to do all that.
Right.
It can be good if you do, right? For sure.
Mm.
But then, right, at some point, it's, you just got to accept, like, I wish I'm 52. I wish I would have known all this stuff earlier. I wish I wouldn't have wasted so
Exactly.
much time drinking. I wish, I wish, I wish. My husband and I sometimes say, if it weren't for God, we wouldn't have had a chance. And those are hard things, but I can't. What am I going to do? You have to start where you have to accept it. And the beauty of that is it's like let's take getting sober, getting a master's degree. This was what I struggled with. Well, by the time I get it, I'll be 50. And I love what I think it was Dr. Henry Cloud or somebody said, well, you're going to be 50 anyway.
Yep.
So you might as well get help now, because by the time you get healthy, you'll still be that same age, right?
Exactly.
So why, that just cracked me up. Okay, so Mike, you've been sugar free for how long? 30 years? Okay.
35 plus years. My boys are twins, identical twins, and that was before their birth. So,
So when you
well, I
say
can tell you my sober date to the letter, almost to the hour, but
okay,
I can't tell you what day. But it predates my kids' birth, so they're 35 and a half, so almost 36 years now.
Okay, so when you say 30 years sober from sugar, I mean, I'm trying to figure out like what sugar you mean. Are you talking like even just pasta sauce that contains sugar? You know, the normal like sugar in stuff that's, or are you talking like Coca-Cola candy bars?
I'm talking zero from all sources of added sugar and
Okay.
no flour, no sugar, no caffeine for 35 plus years. And, I get a lot of pushback in my program about what we call here borderline foods. And borderline foods are fruit and fruit juices, dairy, nuts and nut butters, and grains. And as you heal up from the processed stuff, what I call the actual reduced to a white powder drugs, one or all of those other things are going to start to bother you and act like the sugar did. You'll eat a whole bag of pistachios, a whole bag of almonds or whatever. You eat almond butter out of the jar with a spoon, that kind of stuff.
Oh Lord, I'm telling you, that's already happening. Now it's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to eat a whole bag of the sweet potato
Correct.
chips or the granola now, even the really healthy granola. And
Right.
then I'll put almond milk and honey in it, and it's better. I mean, it feels better, but it's just like I'll just keep eating
No,
it.
it's
I
gonna
mean,
the
I'm like,
most important, yeah,
you can't
concept
just eat
is,
carrots though. What do you eat, Mike? I mean, I don't mean to laugh. I think this is
although
wonderful, but
everybody wants to know what I eat. That's a very common question. And I've been through everything from vegetarian to carnivore and everything in between, and I've kind of settled on what's similar to a Mediterranean diet,
yes,
quite
that's
a
the
bit.
way I've been cooking, okay?
Yeah.
So when I'm not cooking, it's harder. Okay,
Yeah,
so
no, you do have to do a lot of either food prep or cooking at home. Going out is very difficult in today's world because
oh,
of the same reasons, the sugars in everything, and that keeps them coming back to that restaurant. That their
yeah,
sauces and
yeah,
everything have a lot of sugar
yeah,
in.
yeah,
So yeah, no, it's a tough understanding at the beginning. As tough as we
okay,
mentioned before, level of acceptance and eternal vigilance that you have to go through. But you have to remember, and I think this will come, I believe this is the worst addiction pandemic the world has ever known.
yeah,
And
no,
and it's so because of the lack of education and information. And we
yeah,
do not have the diagnostic tools yet to prove like the cancer, lung cancer from cigarettes yet. Like we don't have the diagnostic tools to quantitatively prove all the things that I'm saying. The most important, I think, scientific, if you folks want to dive in, is that I tell people if you want to get off sugar, study fructose. And for your audience, the table sugar is molecule is half fructose and half glucose. And the fructose in the sugar, in this fruit or the fruit juice or the dried fruit, and in the nuts and in most vegetables is identical to the fructose in table sugar. Like the molecule doesn't change. And the science now is starting to say that the fructose is a psychoactive drug. Many of the scientists that I've interviewed say this, that the fructose is a psychoactive drug that affects the nucleus accumbens and changes behavior. And that's one of the guys has got a grant from the National Health Services, National Health, whatever it is, and he believes that if he can block the fructose pathway, he can cure alcoholism. And it has a lot of proof of this already and still is being funded by the government for this. And so the science is very new, but it's very real, especially in the straight fructose, which is ultra processed sugar in our, like that. So there is scientific backing, and it again takes a little bit of delving into the science to understand it. But it is real. We're early. We're not in the DSM yet, the Diagnostic
yeah,
Statistical Manual, so you can get insurance and go to a treatment center for addiction.
yeah, yeah,
And in the World Health Organization's ICD-10, but there are work groups that I'm involved in as, helping. That's what I did at the Food Addiction Institute, help, raise funds and get attention to these issues so that it can get
yeah,
into these manuals and that, we can move forward. And this is not like addiction, like, not a moral issue. This is a scientific healthcare issue.
yeah.
And we're going to know more in our lifetime. We'll get to see, hopefully, because of the internet, we'll be able to see in our lifetime the advancements that we'll make over the years. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a big topic. I do have an appointment in about 10 minutes, but I really do want to make sure that, if there's any questions you have or you might think the audience has, to get it out. I think one of the things that you've been good about is that it takes about the arc of a podcast to kind of have people understand, again, back to that word real, that sugar is a real addiction, and it's an addiction that affects you emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, obviously physically, and that it takes the same type of recovery, not eat less and exercise more. It is an addiction recovery program, and that you need to embark on. And if I always say, let the information light on you, if you're in recovery, which likely a lot of the people that listen to you or want to be in recovery. Also, people in early recovery, if they'll do this early, it's, look at this part of their diet earlier. It helps them get through the first year of recovery from drugs and alcohol. See, even I'm doing it, regular recovery. It's like, it helps you get through it. There's a few treatment centers that have adopted this kind of thing, and their records of success are much greater than other treatment centers, changing the diet in the centers.
Mike, you've been super insightful. I love this. I'd love to have you back on at some point, talk
I'd
more
like that.
about
It'd be great.
just addiction and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But, in closing, I want to have you mention your program, your book, which I'm going to buy, and just encouragement for people who maybe they're watching, they're just overwhelmed. They keep switching addictions. Maybe now they're onto sugar. Just some thoughts and encouragement for them as to moving forward.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I'm always at sugaraddiction.com. You can download the book free there, or it's actually free on Amazon now. You can buy a hard copy, but the digital version is on there. I have a little quiz there, but I tell people if they've taken the time and understood a little bit of what we've been talking about to get to sugaraddiction.com, they don't really need to take the quiz. But I think one of the places that we've kind of shifted, this is interesting, I have a team at the Quit Sugar Summit, and it's the one that's become the most attention garnering. So we have shifted a lot of the work over to quitsugarsummit.com. And if you'll just go, you'll see all the scientists and stuff. Just leave your email and we'll tell you about the events and it's all free stuff. It's not, you don't have to pay for it. And, when we're going to, and we do it all the time. It's just, but we have one big one a year, which just, as we record this, is just passed, but we'll have another one too. And so we communicate best at quitsugarsummit.com. And I really do appreciate it. This has been wonderful. I love going on recovery podcasts because my job is halfway done. They at least are willing to accept the addiction paradigm.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean that's really what it's all about. Is just healing. How do we heal? How do we do that? And we got to address the stuff that we suppress. Hey, I just thought of that. That's great. I'm going to use that.
We need to address no, that's good. We need to address the things we just suppress or something.
Yeah, you can steal it. I just thought of that.
You may see that as a meme on my page.
Right, I'm telling you. All right, Mike, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.